Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Crashing Your Planet, brought to you and brought to me by Spark and Fizz. My name is Jake McKelvey, and thank you so much, as always, for listening to this show. It's nice to have you here. Today I'm talking with Daniel Ralston. Daniel is a writer. He is, according to this article that he wrote, a BuzzFeed contributor. He's a music video director, and he is, as it turns out, a friend of many of the guests that I've had on the show thus far. I think at least half of them, interestingly. But back to this article that I alluded to mere moments ago. Daniel wrote this article for BuzzFeed.com. It's called They're Not There, The True Story of the Fake Zombies, the Strangest Con in Rock History. And it's this really fascinating and bizarre and puzzling story about something that could just never happen in this day and age. Essentially, there were these bands that were not the zombies that were touring in the United States telling people that they were the zombies. You know, that alone might not sound like the craziest thing, but it gets even weirder, and Daniel will explain in greater depth in the interview. And obviously, you can go just read the article and get the full experience. If you go to BuzzFeed.com/Daniel Ralston, Ralston, you'll see the link there to the article, and it's just so weird and cool, and it's such a neat story that he uncovered, and no one really knew about it. So go read the article. It's really great. Before we get into the interview, I just want to say real quick, thanks everyone who has been listening to the show, and if this is your first time hearing it, then thanks a lot for giving it a shot. Obviously we're trying to find as big of an audience as we can, and we're trying to get more people to listen to the show, and you, the listener, can be a very influential tool. I didn't mean to say tool. You could be a very influential part of this process, if you do so choose. All we're asking is if you're enjoying the show, if you want to just paste a link to it on Facebook or on Twitter, whatever your platform of choice might be, or just when you when you meet up with your friend and catch up, just sneak in a quick. Probably the best thing in my life recently is been listening to Crashing Your Planet with Jake McKelvey on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher, or directly on sparkandfizz.com. Just maybe casually eke that into a conversation. If you want some Crashing Your Planet stickers, if you get in touch with us, we can mail you some stickers free of charge. If you want to have a few for your collection, or hand some out to your friends, that's great. So yeah, let us know if you want to arrange something like that. And just thanks for listening. We do appreciate it a lot, and hopefully you'll stick around. So I'll talk to you after this conversation with Daniel Ralston.
It's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy, and let me try with pleasured hands to take you in the sun to promised lands, to show you everyone. It's the time of the season.
How you doing, Daniel?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Good. So yeah, why don't you bring me through what this article was about, and then we'll sort of go from there.
Absolutely, yeah. So I wrote this article about a story that I've been interested in for a really long time, and finally, as I did my research, I kind of realized that I kind of knew the most about this thing, and I felt really kind of ready to write it. So in 1969, the band The Zombies had a big song with Time of the Season. It went to number 3 on the Billboard charts, and it was it's a song that people still know today. And they were an English band, and the song never did well in England, only ever hit in the United States. So for about a year, the band had no idea that they had a hit record. They broke up. They had actually broken up a year before the song was even released. And they had gone on to form their own new side projects and bands and solo projects. So for about a year, 2 different groups of imposters went around America pretending to be the Zombies. One of them was based in Texas and one of them was based in Michigan, but they actually had the same manager. And this management company, Delta Promotions, just sent them in different directions at the same time. One would, obviously be on the East Coast while the other one was on the West Coast. And then the management company also had a fake version of the Animals and the Archies. It's a pretty wild tale. And then the sort of big twist in my research was that I found out that Dusty Hill and Frank Beard from ZZ Top were in the Texas version of the fake Zombies when they were like in their late teens, early 20s.
The ZZ Top thing, I mean, that was just a matter of digging until you stumbled upon that. Like there was no, that wasn't, obviously common knowledge from anyone who did know about this.
Right. That part is is strange. So there's a guy named Mark Ramsey who actually was in the fake Zombies with the two guys from ZZ Top and another guy named Seb Meter. And Mark Ramsey wrote a blog post in, I think, 2008 or 2009, kind of detailing his time out on tour with the fake Zombies. And I went and looked at this. I found it. I was looking at some record collector's message board or something like that. And there was a mention of it. Just like, oh, this guy wrote this thing. It sounds crazy. And I went and looked at this post and I saw that it had 2 comments and it had been posted like 7 or 8 years ago. And I was like, okay, this is definitely something people don't know about. And the blog post was a little wild and didn't make a lot of sense. And if you read, you can actually read it if you just Google fake Zombies. It'll probably be tougher to show up now, but it's out there. And it mostly focused on the guitars that he was using out on the tour. And almost like the fact that he was out touring as a fake version of the Zombies was like an afterthought to the blog post. And but at the bottom of the post, there was an email address, and I wrote to him, and that email address still worked. And we started talking and kind of struck up a friendship. And he was certainly reluctant at first, as the ZZ Top guys were, to ever talk to me. I think there's always been some nervousness from the parties that they had done something wrong, even though this management company basically lied to all the people in the fake Zombies and told them that they legally acquired the rights to the music and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But it happened 46 years ago. One of the really exciting things was that I got to actually go and hang out with the real Zombies, and I got to show them all these pictures of the fake Zombies, and actually they didn't know about the ZZ Top connection until I told them, which was like a pretty awesome thing and a pretty cool moment.
So you think that the ZZ Top guys, did they feel there were going to be repercussions if they talked to you?
That was my initial thought, was that they must think like, oh my God, somebody's going to come and put them in handcuffs or something like that. Yeah. But I talked to a friend of mine who's like kind of an old school rock journalist guy, a guy named Gary Johnson, who helped me with the research on this story a little bit. And he and I had a discussion where I think he kind of honed in on it. He said, it just doesn't fit into the ZZ Top narrative, which is that they were these guys kind of like straight off the fields of Texas who started playing blues.
Yeah.
In reality, they spent like a year pretending to be this British psychedelic band, which is, which is only half true, actually, because as I talk about in the story, they only played one Zombies song when they were on tour as the Zombies. It was a very weird time for live rock music, which is, I think, the biggest takeaway from the story for me is just that, like, going to see a show in 1969 that was not in an arena was a complete mess.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what an event like that would be like. So this show sort of like not necessarily centers around, but we talk a lot about sort of like the DIY or like indie side of music. And as someone who's played a bunch of these like sort of DIY, VFW style shows or like, shitty club shows or whatever.
Yeah, no, I came up in the same world. Yeah.
Okay. So it's weird to think that like those types of bands could have been playing these possibly similarly, thrown together, horribly assembled shows like in the 60s, right?
Oh,
like
there's one of my favorite thing in my research was I went to Michigan and I actually dug through some like microfilm from the local newspaper of the era, and I found a review of one of these zombie shows where the reviewer didn't know that it was the fake Zombies, and he says that they were terrible, of course, because they didn't sound anything like Tell Her No or She's Not There. He says they're terrible, but they played the show with Question Mark and the Mysterians, the real Question Mark and the Mysterians, and it says that at the end of Question Mark's set that no one clapped because they had at that point 96 Tears was out and was a big hit for Question Mark and the Mysterians, but their keyboardist had quit a week before and they didn't have anybody to replace him and they couldn't play the song without him.
Yeah.
And the first song of Question Mark's set, they didn't know that the microphones weren't working. Like, this is a band who had probably a top 5 single at the time.
Yeah.
You know, playing a show where the mics don't work and no one claps at the end.
Yeah, that's insanely bizarre. And that's like you would expect that to happen in a bad movie about that era. Like that's the kind of like cliche that would be mocked and assumed to not have actually happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a weird thing. It's definitely such a weird time, and you know that weird time sort of creates the vacuum too, where a few years before, like rock and roll music, nobody really cares enough about it to try to pull off a scam like this. And then, of course, a couple years later, like technology catches up, and you could never do it.
Right.
So there's just this weird void, and you know, a lot of people I've seen, you know, I unfortunately have bothered to read the comments on a couple places the story's been posted. They've been almost overwhelmingly positive, but some people have said like, oh, why didn't he talk about how there was also a fake blank, whoever.
Yeah.
There were so many fake bands at this point. It would have the article would have been 25 times longer if I'd even walked down that path.
Sure.
You know, it was just a thing that happened back then.
What do you feel about that type of thing happening? Like, do you think that was a bad thing to be going on?
Yeah, you know, I think it was, but I think it speaks a lot to what fandom was like at the time too. Like, you know, it's so easy to be an obsessive now. Like, it's so easy to be incredibly engrossed in the one thing that you like, whether it's one band or one genre or music in general. It's very easy to be an expert, you know. And back then, it was so much harder, and the people who were like the 10 people who wrote for Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
You know, and there weren't a lot of people going to see bands who were like obsessive in that same kind of way. And I think a lot of people would go to see Question Mark and the Mysterians to hear one song. They'd go to see the Zombies to hear one song, and the bands knew it. So, you know, I think the thing with the fake Zombies guys is, particularly the guys in Texas, is that they were kids for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But they did have the one member, Steve Meter, who actually had a hit record when he was 16 years old, and then went on tour with the fake Zombies after that. And he actually knew a little bit of the world of like being out on tour and how it worked and all that kind of stuff. So I think, you know, there's definitely elements of it that now looking back at it are just like, oh my God, that's really fun and really funny. And certainly the response that I've gotten has been that. But, you know, at the time, I think the probably sharpest contrast you can draw is that when I told Chris White from the Zombies about this situation, he like doubled back in his chair laughing, you know, calling his wife over to come look at these pictures. And in the one article that was written about it in Rolling Stone in 1969, the first line of the article is, Chris White is furious.
Oh.
You know, so like it actually was a thing that was affecting them at the time when they did find out about it. And there's also the element that the guy who ran Delta Promotions, the promotions company, was telling people that the singer of the Zombies had died in a car accident. So it was like, anytime something like that happens, like that's where you start to get into like actual fraud,
right?
You know, and things where they're having to the real zombies are having to prove that they're alive.
Yeah, that's another thing that, again, it's like something you would expect to see happening in a movie, and like it seems like, you know, especially in that sort of time frame, like I guess the 60s, or there was a lot more of that sort of like just duping, you know, sort of approach to stuff like that, where like I'm curious how many careers, I guess particularly within music, were built off of an enormously fabricated thing like that.
Yeah, I think the ZZ Top guys probably view it that way too. You know, if I was gonna venture a guess into the psychology of it, I'd say like, oh well, you know, it was a stepping stone for them to take the next step to eventually form the actual band. You know, that could also be a part of it. But yeah, I think I have a feeling the next few months are going to be full of weird stories from people coming out of the woodwork. I just have a feeling based on the way that people have been talking to me about it. Just to give you an example, like my girlfriend's uncle texted her and was like, "Oh, I love the article. It was great. I'm kind of realizing that maybe I saw a fake version of the Flying Burrito Brothers in 1970. You know, like I think people are going to start having those kinds of moments, which is awesome. I think that's the best possible result.
That's hilarious. Yeah, you're putting that notion onto people's radars that
yeah, exactly.
People are going to rethink their entire musical histories here.
Yeah.
And so ZZ Top formed like Frank and Dusty. Did they meet through this fake band?
They did know each other before that, but not long.
Okay.
And it was definitely they played together a little bit in American Blues before the Zombies tour, and then they pretty much formed ZZ Top immediately afterwards.
Okay. So yeah, just I guess backtracking a little bit. I'm inclined to think like I don't think that was a good thing either. It's obviously not good for people to be pulling one over on all of these fans. But I guess like more and more, I mean, just a minute before talking to you, my dad was watching the like John Fogerty Creedence revival, some concert that they filmed for the the new era of John Fogerty, like rehashing these Creedence songs, and I look at it and I'm like, man, this kind of bums me out. Like, I don't think, I mean, not to slander John Fogerty, but like he doesn't sound as good as he used to. You know, his voice doesn't quite hold up for me. And it's just weird to see a thing like that and go, you know, it's just kind of depressing in some ways, but at the same time, it's like, hey, if people are, you know, they want to see his music, they want to see, you know, they want to see John Fogerty, and like, I guess I think more about just the raw entertainment aspect of things like that, as opposed to like, you know, I guess setting aside the authenticity of any of it. You just look at it and it's like, well, hey, if this is what people want to see, if these are the songs they want to hear, then why shouldn't they be able to hear them? But at the same time, you have these fake bands that are presumed to be the bands that you are going to see. So it's a weird thing, but I don't know, like, I guess, can you sort of respond to that as far as, you know, obviously putting in the Zombies thing into perspective, but also like all these sort of, you know, reunion.
Yeah,
band.
I know. I get what you're saying. It's funny. You know, there's that big festival. I live in California now. And there's that big festival happening out here called Desert Trip.
Yeah. Which
is like Roger Waters and Paul McCartney and The Who and the Rolling Stones and Bob Dylan and Neil Young. I think that's it, right? And, you know, I think there's a dark subtext to that that's like, well, we can put a festival together for all the people who say, I should see that person before they die.
Right.
Which sounds very dark, but I think it's kind of true. That being said, I get what you're saying about Fogerty, but I'd say two of the, and I'm not really like a classic rock purist or anything like that. I like a lot of classic rock stuff. I grew up in like East Coast punk world, but two of the best shows I've seen in the past 10 years were Paul McCartney and Roger Waters. And as a matter of fact, the Roger Waters show that I saw was absolutely the most anti-corporate, anti-establishment show I've seen probably since I saw like Jello Biafra play. He had like he played in a baseball stadium in Philadelphia, and he had blacked out every single one of the advertisements in the entire stadium. And, you know, like had a scene on the video screen behind him where there were like Mercedes logos and crucifixes and stars of David raining down. Like it was like very, 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 very liberal.
Yeah.
And you know, I think it's hard to grow old gracefully, you know? And I think that guys like John Fogerty probably want to keep doing it. You know, I think if he wanted to stop, he could. I think a lot of those guys could if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think there is something to be said for going to see an artist play a song that you really love, that has meant a lot to you for your whole life, and seeing them do it. Like, I saw Paul McCartney play at Irving Plaza. He did a one-off little show there last Valentine's Day to like 500 people.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was 20 feet from the guy who wrote Hey Jude playing Hey Jude.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, like that actually might have been the first time I've ever been at like a classic rock show where I was like, I completely understand why you would want to do this, or why anybody would want to do this,
Yeah. No, it's funny to hear you say that, because I've sort of had that same realization just recently. Like, I'm going to see Black Sabbath later this year.
Totally.
And like 2 years ago, maybe even less, I mean, anytime one of these bands comes around, like, I used to love AC/DC. I still like AC/DC, but like, I guess leaving aside all this Axl Rose stuff, like prior to all that sort of stuff happening, like, you see bands like that coming around, and for me, I'd just be like, why on earth would anybody go to see one of these bands? Like, I don't understand at all. It's got to be the most depressing thing you've ever seen. And then, I got the offer to go see this Black Sabbath show, and I was like, this is supposedly going to be their last tour ever. I think it would be cool to see Black Sabbath. And I guess kind of since making that decision, I've thought more about just that sort of thing. Like, why shouldn't you go see any of these bands that you love, especially knowing it might be your last chance to ever see them,
Definitely. And that's actually a big part, I think, of why I was trying to figure out exactly why because there have been these stories of fake bands before. There was a story in Rolling Stone I guess maybe like 10 years ago, about a fake Fleetwood Mac situation, and there have been these things before. And I was thinking about why the Zombies thing kind of hit, and they are kind of one of those bands where they have songs that not just like music fans like. It's amazing how often I've talked to people about the Zombies. Like, talk to people who are not huge music fans who are like, oh my God, I love that "What's Your Name, Who's Your Daddy" song. Or, you know what I mean? Like, people who are not like music obsessives, like maybe you or I are, where they're like, it's just it's a band who has transcended into the mainstream a little bit, but still have like, they're definitely like a band that like music people still really love too. So I think it's like, it's had appeal to like that crowd. And then also, to people who are maybe more casual music fans. But in my research for the story, I got to go see the Zombies play in Beverly Hills. They played a little theater there, and they were doing the Odyssey and Oracle tour. So the first half of the set was all like their early hits, some newer songs, and some covers, and then they took a break, and then the second half they played Odyssey and Oracle in its entirety. And I mean, watching people, there was a guy and his son sitting in front of me, and the dad was wearing the Zombie shirt he had just bought for the show, and his 13-year-old son was wearing a Procol Harum shirt. And I was just like, oh, that's a huge part of the classic rock thing too, is like the generational aspect. It's like, what 13-year-old kid in 2016 loves Procol Harum? It's like, It's because he goes to see these kinds of bands with his dad, and that's like a bonding thing.
Yeah.
And he'll be able to say someday, like, yeah, I saw the Zombies play. Like, they were 70, but I saw them play.
Yeah, he'll be able to lord that over his grandchildren.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad that I have come to terms with that sort of thing, because, and I think part of it might be the like sort of being involved in, the kind of DIY or like punk or, whatever, like sort of scene of the moment. And I say that, relatively speaking, but there's so much stuff, I guess, within that world, and I guess just within like modern day music fandom, where there's so much elitism and I'm punker than you and I'm punker than you kind of stuff going on, that just after a while it makes you go, why does anybody care about that?
I totally agree. I mean, I tend to be like a music fan who gets obsessed with certain things for periods of time. And like for me, the past couple of months, it's been Tom Petty, where it's just like, I'll see people on the internet talking about like whatever band like modern baseball or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, I have literally listened to nothing but Tom Petty for the past 2 months.
Yeah.
And I kind of like enjoying music outside of the realm of people who want to talk about music all the time.
Yeah, no, I get that. And it's nice to be able to just resign yourself to that and not have to. I'm still kind of fighting with that. Like, do I want to just decide that I don't care to keep up with things anymore?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's sort of what I've been, unconsciously doing for the last maybe couple of years, but it's not something that I particularly am happy about. It's just harder for me.
Yeah.
Now,
well, look, I'm going to give you some unsolicited advice.
All right.
Let yourself off the hook. it's like that's the kind of pressure you're only putting on yourself. It's
Yeah.
You got it. You know what's going to make you happy. Just follow whatever makes you happy.
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right, and I think that's what most people tend to say is, why does it matter ultimately? But I don't know. It's like there's the part of me that wants to know what's going on and be hip to the whatever's new. But then there's part of me that I most of what I enjoy isn't that, and so
sure.
I want to appeal to both sides.
Well, there's that intrinsic thing left over from like the previous generation of like music snobs or whatever, where it's like finding the obscure, knowing about everything,
Yeah.
But now it's 2016 and it's so easy to find out about everything.
Right.
There's nothing more liberating than somebody saying like, have you heard blank? And just being like, no, I haven't heard it. Because I can't tell you the number of times I've heard, seems to always be men, of course, seem to say, I've never heard them, but I've heard of them.
Yeah, right.
It's like, okay, that helps us in no way at all. Just say you don't know it. It's fine.
Yeah,
Nobody's going to judge you.
Yeah, no, that's you're exactly right. That's super funny. That's a weird instinct that people have. Like because I think I've put myself in that zone sometimes too, where I'll think like if I were to have said I've never listened to them, but I know the name. Like, what is the other person's reaction to that? Like, oh, okay, I can still think you're pretty cool now because like you've heard of it, so you're, like why would they care if I've heard that name before? That's absurd.
Yeah, like they're gonna be like, oh, great.
yeah. That's funny. It's like sort of a byproduct of the last few interviews I've done for the show have been like me receiving advice about how I should like operate my musical intake habits, and I don't mean to steer it that way, but I keep like my guests will just all of a sudden tell me what I need to do, which I like because I'm trying to figure it out, so it's helpful.
Yeah, you've talked to some of my friends recently, right? Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
John Solomon and Josh Cantor.
And Josh Cantor. And do you know Ryan Walsh?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
he was on the show too.
I gotta talk to that guy soon because I guess it's not a secret he's writing a book.
Right. Yeah.
And I've got some people interested in turning this into a book, so I'm gonna hit that guy up for some advice.
Oh, great. That is awesome. I love seeing Josh and I talked about this. He was the most recent episode to go up as I'm talking to you, and him and I talked a lot about sort of the sort of vacuum that a lot of this stuff the worlds that I guess you and Josh and Ryan and John and me to a smaller extent because I'm newer to it, but that we all sort of inhabit is not as large as you might think in the grand scheme of things. And like just knowing that 70% of the people I've had on the show so far, that's weird. And I'm curious because you're on the West Coast, and all of those aforementioned people are on the East Coast. I guess you said you were on the East Coast until...
Yeah, I just moved here about 9 months ago.
Okay.
For a job.
So I guess what I'm getting at is... I don't need you to tell me how you met all three of those people.
Oh,
but
sure.
But how...
Yeah, I guess most people... I guess John Solomon I've known for a while. Actually, I will tell you embarrassingly that somewhere deep in his radio show's archives, my band that I was in 2003 played his radio show. And if you find it, I will probably hunt you down.
What's the name of that band?
We were called Greyhounds. It's a just sort of indie rock band, kind of Clash influenced sort of stuff.
Okay, cool.
So I've known John for a long time. I've been a fan of his for a long time. And then I guess it was 2011, I used to host a show called Low Times with Maggie Sirota and Tom Sharpling.
Oh, cool.
That was a long-form music interview show. We would do like one-on-one. Each one of us would do an interview with somebody, and then we'd occasionally do episodes where the three of us would like play a game. We did a thing where we did like a Field of 64 bracket to find the worst lyric of all time. We did a thing called a fantasy band draft that I came up with, which is basically like exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah.
But then you could like steal members from each other's bands. And then interview-wise, I did an interview with Guy Picciotto from Fugazi on that show. That kind of went a little bit nuts on the internet. It was the first time he'd done an interview in a long time. And that was in 2012. And then we stopped doing Low Times in 2014. Tom got very busy, and I started directing a lot of music videos, which I still do a lot of now. So I met Josh through Low Times. He was a guest on Low Times. And then Ryan and I just know each other from the internet. I think he was a Low Times fan, and then I love his band. So it kind of goes both ways. Yeah.
I love hearing that. It never fails to amaze me just to know, like I said, just knowing that all of you guys know each other, and it just sort of puts the whole thing into perspective. Like we're not as, I don't know, we're all kind of in this together, I guess, to a degree.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so
there's
cool.
a nice change that's been going on lately, which is that, like, you know, it's not fun to be like a prick.
Yeah.
I mean, I can totally be one a lot.
Yeah.
And I probably publicly hate more things than most people do. But, you know, there's a lot of good people out there doing a lot of really great stuff, and it's worth supporting and worth, you know, sticking up for each other and having each other's back too, which is a nice feeling.
I agree. And I think that's something that I've been so, I don't want to say impressed, but something I've been so humbled by and pleased with is since starting this show, and just, you know, the more nice people you meet within this world, the more encouraging it is to stay inside of it, because it's pretty easy to get you know, turned off, kind of like what I was saying earlier, by just the elitism and the condescension, and you know, there's kind of a lot of that, and I don't mean to sound negative, but like there is that kind of stuff that happens, and I feel like yeah, I guess there's a sector of that world, it seems, of people who totally just take the nice guy route to being, you know, to existing within it, and that's the part that I like associating myself with.
Well, I think there are probably a few people who would probably say that I am not one of the nice guys, but but I think the people who I'm actually friends with would go to bat for me. So that's the best I can say. I think it's a weird thing though that you're mentioning though, because I think the thing that's important for me, and you look at a guy like John, a guy like Josh, or Ryan, you know, a huge thing for me is just, are you doing something original? Are you doing something that's distinctly your own? Are you doing something that that is like about creation of content, or that, you know, it sounds like a weird word to say. Yeah. Are you like creating something, or are you reacting to something? Mm-hmm. And I think I am always drawn towards people who are creating something, and people who are like exist in the music world to like recap things or just write reviews or whatever. That's like a situation where I tend to not get along so well with people, because it can feel like, first of all, the idea of having to have like 4 opinions a week about albums is completely exhausting to me.
Yeah.
So it feels sometimes like, well, I know that I need to live with something for a long time before I can even have a feeling about it. So now we're in this era where like a record comes out and people will review it the night it comes out.
Right.
The hour it comes out. It's like, we got up the first review, and you know, I am like internet friends with a lot of music people, and it can be like a real turnoff to see to see even like sometimes I feel like I've watched some of the best minds of my generation get their brains eaten by the internet.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you. I get frustrated with that kind of thing too. Do you want to I don't want to like facilitate any new beefs here or anything, but like I guess what is your like your main frustration with what with this
Well,
kind of stuff?
I'll just say that like I think Vice sucks,
Yeah.
and I think like most of what they do is bad. And I have some friends who write for their music site for sure, who do some really good work. Zach Lopez in particular is a great writer, and I think understands exactly what he's doing operating in that world, which is something else that I have a lot of respect for.
Yeah.
But like I don't know, it doesn't do it for me. I feel like it's not even aimed at me, so I don't know what I'm complaining about. But
Yeah.
it feels like the way that they cover things is like the exact opposite of how I want to cover things. You know, I do a web series thing called Pizza Pals for a site called Taste Talks, which is a food site. I have a friend named Colin who I do the show with. He hosts it, and we co-created it. He ate at all 400 plus pizzerias in Manhattan over a couple year period and wrote a book about it for Simon and Schuster. And he's like a legit punk dude, like, you know, studded vest punk guy.
Right.
And he's super charming on camera. And our show is him interviewing women and people who identify as women, punk musicians over a slice of pizza. And there's a way that we make it where we felt like we wanted to give the interviews room to breathe and still have it be interesting to look at and be fun and funny. We do these little segments in it that I think are really funny. And, you know, I like the idea of coming at things from a place of like, first of all, it should be something that nobody else is doing, which I think we've really done with that show. And then also, you know, there's a way that a lot of Vice program, especially their video stuff goes, where it's like this sort of fish out of water thing where it's like a person goes to a location that they're afraid of, and then they discover that the people are actually really nice, you know? And it's like, that's a formula for a story for sure, but I'm not interested in that formula. And it just, I don't know, I just think that, I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday about this stuff, and we were saying that we think that, I mean, do you mind if I ask how old you are?
Yeah, I'll be 24 in a couple weeks.
Okay. So there was you know, I don't know if you remember this, but like, it was still a big deal, like, not that long ago for a band to have a song in a commercial.
Yeah.
You know, like when the Shins were in a McDonald's commercial, there was like legitimate outrage from the indie community.
Right.
And I feel like the concept of selling out sort of doesn't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that somebody like Vice really accelerated that process where it's just like, grab it, go, get whatever you can, but also still kind of call yourself punk or call yourself, you know, like outside the mainstream.
Yeah.
But if you're doing everything exactly like the mainstream does, then you are the mainstream.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
And I think now there's starting to be, I think you will see it more over the next few months, like a real reaction to Vice and how they do things that I think people are just kind of like going to be done with it.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how, like I was just talking to a friend of mine last night about how, you know, we were talking about Spotify and streaming services, and then we were, you know, I had said like it's going to be weird to see in like 5 or 10 years how, you know, people are going to jokingly talk about Spotify the way they jokingly talk about MySpace now. Like, oh, I'm going to like log into my Spotify account and see if it still exists, you know?
Yeah.
Like
totally.
It's going to be interesting to see what like the next era of all of these things is going to be. Like, is it going to sink deeper or is it going to like pull itself out a little bit?
Yeah, no, I know. And it's like, you know, those streaming services have done a pretty good job of making money for themselves.
Yeah.
But the artists obviously don't make any money.
Right.
And the idea of the actual product, the music itself being so devalued to the point that, you know, like a Spotify employee makes so much more than the musician whose music they've built the platform on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just shows you that like the whole thing is wrong.
I think this is a pretty good segue for something I wanted to talk about because,
Sure.
So going back to the Zombies article, that sort of highlights a lot of the crookedness of like the music era of the music business of that era. And there's as you've mentioned, there's like more than just this one example. Like a lot of things like that happened, and a lot of people were being ripped off, and a lot of managers were taking the majority of the money that the artists were making and leaving them with the scraps. A lot of that sort of stuff happening. And then, so how do you compare that to, like, it seems nowadays there's some, there's all these like think pieces and things about how, it's impossible to be a musician now, and every musician is ripped off. And so how do you think those two things compare? Like, do you think it's better or worse now than it was in the era that the article takes place in?
I think in a lot of ways it's the same. You're always going to have artists and businessmen, and I think that it was, the guy who founded Delta Promotions, the company that ran this scheme with the fake zombies and the fake animals and the fake Archies. He ran a club, but he also like had a soap business and an engineering company, and he treated this just like he would any other business. And his goal was to make money. He actually didn't make any money. He fucked it up pretty badly.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody really ended up making any money off this grand plan. But it's the same. It's a devaluing of art and artists and the work that they do, and saying like, well, how can I take this thing that's pure and beautiful, that is making people feel something they've never felt before? How can I turn it into a business and sell it? And how is Spotify is the exact same thing. We're going to exploit the voracious desire for people to consume music. So we're going to make it as easy as possible and as cheap as possible, and give absolutely no thought to the people who made the music.
Yeah.
I have a friend who's in a very, very popular band, who told me that one of his songs, and I know these stories are apocryphal and these stories also are very widespread, but he had a song that had like 4 million plays and he got a check for $130 or whatever.
Yeah.
It's absolutely outrageous that's how it goes, but that's how it goes. And, I could imagine being one of the guys in the Zombies back then and being like, God, we worked so hard at this thing. We broke up our, some of the guys in the band, the guys who did not have the publishing rights, after the Zombies broke up, they had to go get day jobs.
Yeah.
And obviously the bands who toured as the Zombies didn't make much money, but I'm sure the real Zombies, when they found out about it, were like, oh, those guys are off in America on tour, pretending to be us. That should be me.
Right.
And they couldn't have known that it wasn't, in their mind, they probably were picturing the Zombies playing, these giant shows, because that's what they would have been doing if it had been done right.
Yeah.
And it never happened. And it's a real exploitative thing then, just as it is now. And I mean, it definitely, the number of people I know personally who've been screwed over by those streaming things, just, it just makes me sad.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about that kind of stuff. There's evidence on either side. I guess it probably favors the its bad side a little more than the other. But I don't know. I mean, I use Spotify and I buy records too. And I go to shows, it's like it can be used in a beneficial way. And especially now, with there being so much stuff, to be consumed constantly, I guess, how are you supposed to make a decision about what you do want to buy when it comes time to buy it? I don't.
Right. Well, there used to be, it wasn't the worst thing in the world to buy a record without having heard it.
Right.
I definitely did that a lot. And I know I sound like I'm 1,000 years old right now, but, I just think sometimes I like being into less stuff, like we were talking about before, like not feeling the need to like consume everything.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, if I do hear a song, if I go to see something and it's like, oh, I'm going to go listen to this new track by whoever, then if I like that thing, I'll just go and pull the trigger and I'm like buy the whole album on iTunes or go to a record store and buy it and just say like, okay, so maybe I like this for a week and then I don't listen to it again and it just sits in my music. Well, that's what most people's record collections are.
Right.
And that's okay too.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like that approach too. I mean, yeah, there's no harm in in buying something that it's going to be part of your collection. You might pull it out again in 20 years and realize how
And
much you love
totally
it.
love it. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at my records right now here in the apartment. It's like, I haven't listened to 90% of these here, in years.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that rediscovery aspect of it is pretty cool. That's obviously something you don't really get through Spotify or I mean maybe even through iTunes or something, but I don't know. It's I'm I think the angle of the show might be I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to get somebody to tell me how I'm supposed to feel about this stuff, because it's really confusing, and it's
Well, I am interested to see a music writer friend of mine sent me a direct message on Twitter last night and said, dude, I'm going to check. I'm really excited to see if the Zombies have any upswing on Spotify this week.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I am curious to see if that happens. If it does happen, I will be very happy. And actually, Chris White from the Zombies Facebook messaged me the other night, which I can't believe I even just said that sentence out loud. But he was like, oh my, I love the article so much. We're so excited about it. And he was telling me about their tour plans. And we started talking about that. I was like, I really hope you guys see an upswing in sales this week. And he said it wouldn't surprise him. And I'm very interested to see if that does happen.
Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I mean, I listened to it 2 or 3 times since it came out 2 days ago. So, there's 4 cents to the Zombies right there.
I am working on, I mean, I would say this will probably never come of anything, but both bands are playing a festival together in Germany in July. And I think I might start planting the seeds of trying to get them to at least get in the room together. So hopefully we can make that happen.
Oh, very cool. So, so what do you say to the bands that do commercials now, or just, I guess, stepping back to a moment ago?
Yeah, I think I'm reading. Have you read that Replacements biography that just came out?
I have not, no.
Okay, highly recommended. And
Yeah.
to anybody who's listening here, you absolutely should. It's called Trouble Boys. It was written by a guy named Bob Mayer, and it might be the best rock biography I've ever read, and it's incredible. And I think even if you're not a huge Replacements fan, which you should be because they're great,
Yeah.
but there's a part I just read in the book where they were asked to play the opening of the Mall of America in Minnesota when it opened, and they turned it down, in the face of, if they had played it, it would have really helped their career, because one of the guys who was investing in the mall owned Warner Brothers Records, and he really wanted them to do it, and was like, I'll help you guys out in ways I haven't helped other bands before if you do this. And they said no, and it was weird. I was like, yeah, of course they said no. And then it's like Westerberg and Tommy Stinson saying, that was so stupid of us not to play it now. So it's like, I think, the concept of selling out and all that stuff it's definitely nice on paper. I hope everybody gets an opportunity at some point to have enough success that they get the opportunity. I think there was the comedian Bill Hicks who once said that there's no such thing as selling out on your way up. So I think if you're trying to make it and trying to carve out something for yourself, I think we now live in an era where it's probably a necessity, and I would not place the blame on a band who wants to do that. I would place that blame on stuff like Spotify and streaming services, where bands can't make money the way that they used to.
Yeah, I get that. There's a lot of things I see about that sort of thing, now, where I guess sort of the suggested approach for a lot of bands is just like, do whatever you have to do to make it work. Leave your morals at the door.
Well, that being said, all my heroes are people who stick to their guns.
Yeah.
So somebody like Ted Leo, who is a friend of mine and somebody I've directed a couple of videos for, a guy with incredible ethics who has managed to make a great career for himself. A guy like Billy Bragg, somebody like Kate Bush, people who really, fought for their independence Actually, if you get a chance, I don't know if you saw that. There's a documentary about Tom Petty on Netflix right now.
I have. I'm gonna watch it when I have like 4 hours to spare.
It's very long, but it was directed by Peter Bogdanovich, who's a director I really like. And the number of times that Tom Petty fought against the system and really fought for his independence, I think you will find shocking. And you come away from it being like, Tom Petty is a legit dude, and I really like him so much. You know, they wanted to raise the prices of records on the back of on his success, like across the board. They were going to raise the price of LPs. And he basically said, like, you can't do that. I'm not going to give you my music if you're going to charge people that much for it.
Yeah.
You know, and this is like him taking money out of his own pocket by saying that. You know, and I think
awesome.
People like that who stand up, you know, I hope that we're swinging back to an era where that is something to be honored and something to be congratulated.
Yeah.
And I think that as long as we keep some people out there who are still doing that stuff, that it sets a good example.
I like that. I like that sentiment, and I think that's a pretty good thing to kind of wind down on.
Sure, Jake, it was great talking to you, man.
Oh, likewise, Daniel. I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to sort of plug or tell anyone about?
No, they could just read the article.
Cool. You can follow Daniel Ralston on Twitter at Daniel Ralston, DanielRalston. You may notice that I'm sort of trying to ambiguously pronounce his last name because I'm not 100% sure whether it's Ralston or Ralston. So I'm trying to find some middle ground there. Sorry, Daniel, I maybe should have just asked you, but here we are. You can read the article on BuzzFeed. Go to BuzzFeed.com/Daniel Ralston, or just go to BuzzFeed and search for the zombies. You'll probably get like a top 13, Walking Dead bad guys list, and then this awesome article. So click on the latter if you have the choice. So thanks again to Daniel for doing the show, and keep your eye out on all of his platforms for news about maybe that book deal that he's trying to land for the zombie story. You can follow Spark and Fizz on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook at Spark and Fizz. Go to sparkandfizz.com and check out what they've got going on over there. There's a new column on urban exploration zines that has been going up every 2 weeks, which is really great. And there's all kinds of other really interesting, unique stuff. Intimate interviews with bands and musicians. What's good on Netflix. There's mixtapes. Just go check it out there. It's a fun place to spend some time. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob C. McKelvey. Again, reach out if you want to maybe have some stickers sent your way, or if you want to just say anything about the show. We like to hear from you. So thanks again, everyone, for listening. I'm going to maybe try to get my hands on at Jake McKelvey on Twitter. Someone has that right now, but I'll keep you posted on that. Maybe my handle's too confusing with the middle initial. I don't know. But anyway, thanks a lot. Really appreciate you listening. We'll see you soon.